70% of the average child's diet in the United States is made of ultra-processed foods.
On this week's podcast, I had the very distinct pleasure of having my friend Shawn Stevenson on to talk about the state of affairs of the American health system and the American diet. He just wrote a new cookbook, which I'm really excited about. And as we talk about in this podcast, the beginning part of the cookbook is like a little mini book that has so much incredible information. His premise is that our health has gone downhill rapidly in America, and this is due mostly to eating tons of ultra-processed foods and loss of community around eating food and sharing the intentions with which we choose our foods. So this podcast was really fun. We talked about a lot of high-level stuff that I haven't really thought about before. Shawn opened my eyes to some of this stuff and taught me some things. So I think you guys will enjoy this podcast with Shawn Stevenson. He's an OG in the health space, and I hope you'll check out his new cookbook as well. Shawn Stevenson in the house. Thanks for coming on the podcast, my man.
Of course, it's my honor. Anytime I get to talk to you, it's an honor. And by the way, before we even get started, I just want to tell everybody that you are one of the most remarkable, generous, insightful, brave human beings that I've ever met, man. I just absolutely appreciate you so much.
Wow, thank you, brother. I didn't expect that at the beginning of the podcast, but it's awesome to see you. I feel the same way about you. You know, I was reading the pre-release copy of your new cookbook coming out before this podcast, and I was thinking, this is really cool. Like, Shawn has gathered an incredible amount of like very, I would say, accessible information and very actionable information. It's like a really cool, you know how in the beginning of a cookbook, there's like the first part of the cookbook where you write like a little tiny mini book before the cookbook and you share all the recipes. And that part of your cookbook is really cool, man. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for that. And I was really impressed. And we're going to go through some of that right now because, I mean, it's like when I look at the statistics and the ideas that you're sharing in the beginning of that cookbook, I'm thinking, wow, like, how does anybody not talk about, like, how can this not be talked about more? So let's just start here with the staggering statistic that for most Americans, I think it's more than 60% of their calories are from ultra processed food. How is this possible? What the heck, man?
You know, what's different about this, you know, me being able to share this is that I was one of those people and more. And I shared in the book, there was a time where I was eating fast food at least 300 days out of the year. And this wasn't because I wasn't into fitness. I was a, college student at the time, but it's just because of the culture that I was in. And my mission right now is really to point to what is the root cause of our food choices. You and I both know this, and many people listening, we can offer incredible advice to people that can change their life, right? But we're usually pointing at behavior changes they need to do. But when they take that behavior change into a culture that is inundating them with behaviors that are counter that behavior change, it is incredibly difficult to change. And so what I really pointed my attention at was, how do we change the culture? How do we shift the culture to make these things more viable? And so the study you just mentioned, that was published by the BMJ. And I think the BMJ has done a really good job at being a little bit more balanced the last couple of years. So shout out to them. But one of our most prestigious medical journals, and they estimated that upwards of about 60% of the average American adult's diet is now made of ultra processed foods. And also in my previous book, I really made it a specific intention to differentiate processing versus ultra processed foods, right? Humans have been processing foods forever. All right. Taking something and, cooking it, taking olives, pressing the oil out, whatever that might be, for thousands of years. Ultra processed foods are when these foods are so denatured that they've lost any essence of where they actually come from. And so we're taking a field of corn and eventually it becomes a bowl of Lucky Charms. We're taking a wheat field and eventually it somehow becomes Pop-Tarts. And of course, we've got all these synthetic ingredients, preservatives, additives, food dyes, the list goes on and on. It's no longer food. It is something that is so far from anything we evolved with. Now, this is the real reason that I wrote this book was because I came across this research looking at American children. And the numbers are even worse. So this is the first book that's sharing this new data. And this was a study published in JAMA, right, the Journal of the American Medical Association. And they tracked the eating behaviors of United States children from the age of 2 to 19 for about 20 years. And in 1999, the average American child's diet was made up of 61% ultra-processed foods. Fast forward to 2018, that number is at almost 70% of the average child's diet in the United States is made of ultra processed foods. The very ingredients that we're making humans out of now has changed dramatically. And this is why there is no accident whatsoever that we're experiencing these multi epidemics of chronic diseases. And the last thing I'll share on this note, man, is again, I'm a big numbers guy. Like seeing is believing for me. And so the CDC's numbers just last year, published by the CDC, and they put this out in the form of a little cute infographic, all right, trying to soften the blow, I guess. But they determined that 60% of Americans now have at least one chronic disease. 60% of Americans have at least one. 40% of Americans have two or more chronic diseases. This is absolutely insane at this point. And again, rather than trying to target behavior change, which is important, we're targeting how do we create cultural change to make health easier to access, to make healthy choices just what we do versus trying to turn our world upside down and fight against all these systems that are designed, in essence, to keep us unwell.
Yeah, and that's a great point that we can get into next, is the difference between a health behavioral change versus backing that up or wrapping that around a cultural change, which makes it much easier for a human. Multivitamin, eat your heart out. Check out this review on Whole Package, which contains desiccated testicle from Heart and Soil Supplements. There's a new multivitamin sheriff in town, and it doesn't come from a lab. I'm a soon-to-be 48-year-old male, father to 3 boys, 5, 3, and 10 months. I'm currently building my own home by myself, by hand, and I have a little family farm on the go. Why would a guy in his middle age who should be having his midlife crisis be taking on life by the horns like this? Because I can. I have an exuberant amount of energy. I'm able to recover day after day of using my body to the max, still have energy to play with the kids and help out with the chickens. I owe the majority of this to Heart and Soil Supplements and Paul Saladino, and learning within his own discoveries and his journey. Narrowing my eating window and finding the best in-season fruits and some vegetables has skyrocketed me to feeling better than when I was in my 30s. I've been taking organ supplements for almost 4 years now, and the past year I've been taking Whole Package. Careful with this one, lads. It makes needing the blue pill seem like an embarrassing joke. You want root vitality for men? Look no further. 10 stars, not 5 stars. Whole Package is an incredible supplement. What we know about this one is that the combination of liver, testicle, and blood is very powerful for men's vitality and women's vitality too. Testicle contains bioactive androgens. How do we know? All of our supplements are Informed Sports certified at Heart and Soil, but Whole Package didn't pass because it contains naturally occurring testosterone and derivatives. And when you get these things in the form of food, in the form of actual animal foods, they appear to be much more bioavailable and effective than other ways of getting these sort of testosterone boosters. So Whole Package, there's nothing like it on the planet. Testicle, liver, and blood. You can find all of our supplements at heartandsoil.co. That's .co. Our mission is to help you reclaim your birthright to radical health. But when I hear you talk about these numbers and I hear you talk about the degree of ultra-processed food consumption, and I appreciate your delineation between processed food and ultra-processed food, because I've heard people push back on social media about processed food, and they'll say, what do you mean? Don't talk about processed food. All food is processed. You know, you cook a steak, you're processing it. And I think this is kind of I don't understand why they're pressing back on that, because I think everybody sort of understands what we're driving at here. But there are some people on social media who will nitpick this point. So let's just make it very clear for people: ultra processed versus processed food, fine. But you know what's crazy, Shawn, is that I was in Arizona, probably last year. I went back to the University of Arizona where I went to medical school because I wanted to see what was in their hospital cafeteria at the University of Arizona, at the medical school, in the hospital. And obviously it was mostly ultra processed food and mostly seed oils. But what I also did was I talked to medical students, and I got in trouble for this. I actually got kicked out of the medical school when I was filming this video with these medical students. They told me to stop, but I got about 25 minutes of footage with some medical students, and these are our future doctors. And I asked them, how much nutrition do you get taught? What do you get taught? And it was really jaw-dropping, Shawn. I mean, I think that these numbers, these are published in major medical journals. And my concern, my suspicion is that probably less than 1% of all medical students in the United States understand this phenomenon. It's just, we have doctors who are wearing blinders, not necessarily by their own fault, but because the medical system is not even teaching them these things. I feel like if I show up to day one in medical school, or if somebody gives me the reins to a medical school, which I wish would happen one day, I wish somebody would let me teach at a medical school. Day one, hour one, first 3 minutes of medical school, I'm telling them these statistics. So I just think it's impossible to overemphasize these numbers because, we want to make it so complicated in Western medicine. And it's like, fix this. So, okay, let's go to that. You made this really interesting distinction between behavioral change and behavioral change in the setting of community and culture. People are sick. It's really hard for people to make behavioral change. Why is that so hard?
Such a great question. And by the way, what you're identifying, and it's so crazy that your alma mater, the place that you invested so much into, is trying to kick you out for delivering some proper education on things instead of celebrating you and your success, because you figured some things out. But what a lot of folks don't realize is that currently, unfortunately, the way that our system is designed as far as education for medical students is fostering severe dysfunction for the practitioner. And so there's some of the highest rates of suicide, of mental health challenges, of addiction happening in medical students and in the field of medicine for our practitioners. Not to mention, we've got some of the most robust data on nurses of any kind of demographic in our culture. There's been so many studies done tracking the health of our nurses, significantly higher rates of obesity, significantly higher rates of cancer, about a 30% higher incidence of breast cancer in nurses than the general population. I can go on and on. The system, and by me working at a university for so many years, a lot of people that I worked with were in medical school and or nursing school. And I saw this dysfunction, this was 15, 20 years ago, that they were just beating themselves to a pulp, trying to make it in a system that is just really not really advocating for the health of the practitioner, let alone the patients. And so the last little piece I want to share with that is that when we're going to get this education, we're not being taught, for example, cardiologists, that when you're tracking your patient's blood work, the health of their arteries, their heart health, that when you are analyzing these things, you're looking at the food that your patient has eaten, because their heart is literally made from food. What's circulating through their blood is made from food. Their blood itself is made from food. And so if we're not understanding that, we don't even understand what we're even looking at. And so we have a system that is ignorant of the basis of what creates humans. And, there's a revolution, of course, happening right now. There's a lot more, there's a lot of change taking place, but, it's just certain systems, of course, it takes time. And I believe that we're working towards a tipping point in this because of information like this, platforms like this, and people who have the audacity to share this information. And so, but with that said, how do we actually target cultural change? Well, I think it's important first to understand what culture is. And culture is defined as the values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of a population of people that is then passed on from one generation to the next. All right. That part is very important. So attitudes, beliefs, values, behaviors, then passed on from one generation to the next. We cannot help but be a product of the culture that we're around. It is. Well, Paul is somebody that spent time with hunter-gatherer tribes, and you've been able to witness firsthand a culture that one of their beliefs, for example, this could be a subconscious belief, of course, but one of their beliefs, one of their tenets that's in their DNA, that's really in their psyche, is that if I don't move, I don't eat. If I don't move, I will die. So in order to procure my food, hunting, gathering, whatever the case might be, the food preparation, all of that requires movement. In our culture here in the United States and many other cultures, as this is spreading, there is a subconscious awareness that we don't have to do anything in order to get our food. To the degree, not only have we been disconnected from where our food is coming from over the recent generations, but now we can just hit some buttons on our phone and have food put into our hand. All right, we don't have to move much at all in order to survive. And so we've been, with our innovations, we've been pulling more and more movement out. Whereas our ancestors, the cultural tenet was movement is required for survival. Now, with this being said, here in the United States, and by the way, matter of fact, staying on the same track, especially talking with you, within that hunter-gatherer tribe, for example, the culture also blocks their awareness that Quick Trip is a thing, that 7-Eleven is a place that I can go and get food. I don't have to do this stuff out here. I could just go and throw my spear through a hot dog, right? Their culture blocks their awareness that that's a possibility. So your culture is informing your decisions, all right? Your culture essentially is controlling your cravings as well. So we crave what we're exposed to, what we've had experience with. And in the United States, so for me personally, again, growing up in a condition where when I was in college, I lived in Ferguson, Missouri. And so this is a glorified food desert. Zoning, for whatever reason, allows for every fast food establishment that you can name was in a two-mile radius of my apartment complex. As soon as I come out of the apartment, there's a huge liquor store right there in front of me. I'm just inundated with ultra processed food at every turn. And so, how did I go from that to being able to transform my own health within that context, within that culture? Number one, your culture, of course, we're a product of our culture, but we can create microcultures. We can create microcultures within our own household. But that cultural change happens within ourselves first. And what I just realized, I just went to Maui recently, and being kind of dropped into their culture and spending time with people who were generations upon generations growing up there, and seeing that they have this deep cultural, and some, like a tourist would come and experience this phenomenon of a luau, right? Where, there's this animal that was hunted. We have song and dance and story and celebration. We evolved with that. We evolved having this kind of tribal construct of everybody's involved in the process of food preparation and eating. We ate together forever until recently. Of course, isolated times, maybe you're hunting with your friends, or you're, spending time gathering, you got the kids or whatever, you snacking on some things. But generally, everybody's coming together to eat at the end of all of these processes. And so my question was, could eating together with friends and family, with community, have some kind of protective effect on human health that we're not aware of? Is this an epigenetic controller that we're ignoring? And one of the first things that I led with, and this is just an overall look at what we can do with culture and how our relationships impact our health. This was a study from Brigham Young University. It was a meta-analysis of 148 studies, and over 300,000 test subjects were analyzed, which is a huge data set. And the researchers determined that having strong social ties led to a 50% reduction in all-cause mortality. All right, a 50% reduction in death from everything. All right, that's how powerful it is to have strong social connections. Relationships, and this is according to researchers at Harvard. One of my colleagues, he's the director of the longest running longitudinal study on humans and longevity. And he determined, him and his team, and again, this is over 80 years of data, that our relationships are the number one determinant on our longevity, how long we're going to live. And so now here's where the rubber meets the road with food, community, and health. Another set of researchers at Harvard, and I couldn't believe this, Paul, when I came across this data, I was just like, same as like when you were looking at my book, it's just like, how do people not know this? And these researchers were gathering data on eating behaviors within households and health outcomes, how often people were eating together with their family and their health outcomes. And these Harvard researchers determined that families that eat together on a regular basis had significantly higher intake of vital nutrients that help to essentially prevent chronic disease onset, and significantly reduced intake of ultra processed foods, things like chips and soda. And so I was like, oh, wow, this is interesting. Let me dig further. And then I came across some data. This was published in Pediatrics and JAMA Network as well. And they determined that families that eat together just 3 times a week with their children, those children have significantly lower incidence of developing obesity and eating disorders just by eating together that minimum amount, that kind of minimum barrier for entry, 3 times a week, created some kind of this invisible force field around those kids. And so, of course, me being a why person, I'm just like, why, how is this possible? Like, what, that doesn't even make sense. Like, what is that? What's going on here? And there's a couple of factors. Number one, when we know that we're having family dinner on, Tuesday, Thursday, and brunch on Sunday, whatever the case it is, psychologically, there's a onset of planning. You're going to be planning ahead. Like, what are we going to have for family dinner? Right. And so you're already going to likely be making choices that is going to bring you into the kitchen. Not all the time, but it does incite that. But even more so, one of the reasons this is so effective is the impact that it has on our brain and nervous system to be able to actually sit down and switch off from that sympathetic fight or flight, just that's always going in our modern society, kind of like a low grade fever, and being able to switch over to that parasympathetic, quote, rest and digest nervous system and really down regulate. And that's what being around friends and family, people that you love, activates. We know that, for example, just being in the context of people that we care about, we're producing more oxytocin, for example. And if we're not planning this, and this is not a part of our lives, and I'm telling you, Paul, I ate together with my family. I'm not exaggerating. I sat down and ate with my mother and father. I can count on my hands how many times that was growing up. And most of those times were holidays, right? One of the parents is either gone, something's going on, and or like we would get our food and sit in front of technology. And so those researchers at Harvard that I mentioned at the very beginning, they've determined that only 30% of American families eat together on a regular basis now. It is quickly becoming an endangered activity. It's on the endangered species list right now. And we don't want this to become extinct. And so the mission is to turn this around, to be able to utilize this protective field. And there are many other reasons, by the way, that this is effective, but I just want to lay the groundwork out and how powerful this is.
No, I love it, man. That's amazing. Thank you for that. So well put. When I think back to my childhood, and this was, many decades ago in the 1980s, we didn't eat together that often. Even in the 1980s, my family didn't eat together that often. My dad is a doctor. He was often working. We did sometimes. I don't know if we got 3 days a week, but I don't think it happens that often today. I'm surprised the statistics suggest that even 30% of American families still eat together on a regular basis. I bet that number is quickly being eroded faster than the banks of a raging river. That seems to be, you put it well, an endangered species, an endangered number for sure, an endangered statistic. And I think it does open the door for us to not eat good food and for us to basically just select cheap, fast, accessible food. There's another sort of set of information that you talk about in your book that really got me thinking, which was around the actual sort of agribusiness complex in the United States. Can you tell me what the largest privately held company is in the United States? I mean, don't you talk about this in your book? And then go on from there.
Yeah, so you're talking about the data on Cargill. And, it's really, for me, it's just understanding that being from St. Louis, one of the ideal jobs that we could get when we graduate, and they would come to the job fairs all the time. So we're really the home of Boeing and Monsanto. All right. And so I got to have some firsthand experience in talking with people that work with some of these big companies that are specifically involved in US food production. And Monsanto, of course, being one of them. But, Cargill and being able to churn out so much food, in particular, grain-based foods, and this being really the basis of the diet in the United States now. And my question was, are there any health ramifications? You already know the answer to this, but are there any specific health ramifications for this big shift that's taken place with our main nutritive source? Because when we go to a grocery store in the United States, it looks like there's aisles and aisles and aisles of all this different food. But the reality is most of the food is made from the same stuff. It's made from the same 10 different foods, primarily made from corn, wheat, soy, and much of that is is dangerously treated and grown utilizing things like glyphosate. And a lot of science and a lot of awareness has come out about glyphosate recently. But according to the WHO, glyphosate is a class 2A carcinogen. All right. So this is a probable cancer causing agent. All right. This is not a joke. This is something that is. And in particular, with a company like Cargill, we're looking at, and this is according to the Environmental Working Group, they established that 80 to 90% of these grain-based products are contaminated with glyphosate. And so, and the thing is, it's so integrated into our environment now that it's almost it's difficult to avoid it. And it is without a doubt laced in ultra processed foods. So this adds another layer of danger and dysfunction. And so my question was, how do we get to this place? How is it that these products are so cheap, by the way, that are very cost intensive to create? Because for me, being in that environment in the inner city, I could take $2 and go to Jack in the Box and get 4 tacos. They were 2 for 99 cents, plus a little tax, right? And if I wanted to get, for example, an avocado, that avocado might cost $3 if I'm getting an organic avocado. And it's just like, number one, how is it possible that this is so inexpensive to get these very cost-intensive products in the form of tacos? All the ingredients being from all these different places, let alone the packaging, let alone the marketing involved. Whereas literally an avocado, there's an avocado tree right here on the corner of the block that I live on now. And they fall off the tree. If I'm just walking by, there's avocados on the ground. All right. How is it possible? And this is getting into in college. Fortunately, I had a really diverse education. So economics class, looking at economies of scale. But to make this simple, let's just make this super simple. How is that possible? It really has to do with government subsidies. And here in the United States, and I always like to, and this is another thing that I admire about Paul, is that we're still trying to look at like, what are the potential good? We're not just saying that this system is all bad, but what is the potential good here? And I believe that it started off with good intentions to feed Americans by our government. And when I say that, by the way, please put that in parentheses, our tax dollars. We're paying for this. But our government started funneling billions of dollars into the production of these cash crops, right? So grains and corn and things like that, to make more of these foods accessible to feed Americans. So it might have started off with good intentions, not to mention other farmers, being able to grow fruits and vegetables, things like that. But of course, over time, these companies started to manipulate the system to the degree that barely anything is going towards farmers that are growing anything except corn, wheat, soy, various things that are going to be used for sugar, beet sugar, and whatnot. That's where the majority of, when we're talking on the scale of billions of dollars, about $100 billion, all right, just in a recent subset of time. And now here's where all of this comes into the fold. And like, what are the health outcomes of this? And making that food so cheap because our government is literally investing in the food that is potentially making us sick. So I want to find, is there any data on this actually making us sick? And I came across another study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And the crazy thing, Paul, is like, this stuff is there. The data is out here, but most people just don't know about it. But they looked at the health outcomes of people whose diet was largely consisting of government subsidized foods. And they tracked their data, their health outcomes for several years. And they found that people who were eating the most government subsidized foods had about a 30% increased incidence of obesity, higher rates of diabetes, higher rates of BMI and excessive body fat, higher markers of inflammation. The list goes on and on. They were not doing well. The more government subsidized foods that people eat, the sicker they were becoming. And so in essence, we have a system, our government system right now of what we're investing in our food is essentially investing in the sickness of our population. And with that being said, of course, now what happens when we're getting sick from our food system? Now we're taking a plethora of drugs from this pharmaceutical model as a treatment instead of removing the underlying cause, like what's actually making us sick.
It's pretty crazy when you think about it that the United States government is tilting the tables. It's a rigged casino in Vegas. I guess they're all kind of rigged, but especially it's like a very rigged casino in Vegas. This is a governmental slot machine. The odds are not in the favor of the United States citizens when the US government, like you said, is sending billions of dollars to subsidize the least quality foods on the planet. And when I hear you say this and I'm reminded of this fact, I can't help but think two things. Number one is, how would the health of the United States be different if the US government subsidized animal foods, whether the US government subsidized eggs or chicken or beef or red meat? And then I think, I wonder if there's something shady going on behind closed doors. And the concern that I have, or the suspicion that I have, or the possibility that I'm scared of, is that part of this push right now to demonize animal foods, especially red meat, is because if people realize how nutritious red meat is and organs, and they realize how really devoid of nutrition most grains, corn, wheat, soy are in comparison to red meat, and then they realize that the US government is subsidizing the least healthy foods so that they can be ultra processed and made into essentially legal drugs, it just doesn't look very good. But if there's an overarching narrative that is constantly put in front of us, and you know that if you repeat a lie long enough, it becomes the truth. I believe that's a quote from Hitler, unfortunately, or someone in the Nazi regime. Then we must vilify meat. Meat must be bad for Americans. And then it's like, okay, well, clearly what we're doing is we're subsidizing plant foods. We're subsidizing foods that feed the most people, and it looks good on the surface. But it doesn't add up to me. It makes me think, wow, what if those billions of dollars were withdrawn from plant foods and given to farmers who farm meat, and ground beef were $1 a pound? Or, eggs were 75 cents a dozen. How might that change the landscape of our country if bread is $4 a loaf and eggs are 75 cents a dozen or $2 a dozen? That to me is that's crazy when I think about how everything is stacked against us. And when, as we talked about at the beginning of this point, the fact that these companies behind this are massive. You said in your book that the agribusiness companies are they control 70% of the US economy or something. Like there's some huge statistic with agribusiness. It can't be the US economy. What am I thinking of here, Shawn? It's like 70% of something is all of these agribusiness companies. Cargill, who are essentially they're massive companies.
They control 70% of our food system. And we're talking even worldwide, by the way. It's not just a US issue. And, on that same point, it's just like the big reason here, number one, like you just said, it is totally possible to make those shifts to make a carton of eggs 75 cents versus like literally some of these eggs are like $10 for a carton, especially being in a place like Los Angeles, right? And these things are totally possible, but it's where is our money being siphoned or are invested in, either one of those terms. But also the reason that we allow this as a people is because of the education that we're getting. You and I both went to a traditional university, and I took nutritional science, which was an elective. I didn't have to take it. I took this class, and I was inundated with this belief about this food pyramid, which is transitioned or evolved into, my plate or whatever the case might be. But we are told that we're supposed to make the basis of our diet as an ideal human nutrition to be 7 to 11 servings of these grains. We're educated that this is the best food for fueling the human body, which is obviously nefarious. And by the way, one other little piece, just to kind of couple with that, what I was trying to do with my education, when I was trying to improve my health because I was struggling with an arthritic condition of my spine when I was just 20 years old. I was a kid, 20 years old. and I'm in all this pain, degenerative discs in my spine, uh, two herniated disc, all this stuff. And I was working to try to turn my health around. And so instead of eating Honey Nut Cheerios, I was like, let me eat an adult cereal. I'm gonna eat Quaker squares. I'm gonna eat the Quaker oatmeal squares because it's high in fiber and that's gonna help to improve my health. Let me stop eating this kid's cereal. Well, one of the studies that I share in the book also, and just talking about one thing with glyphosate, the environmental working group analyzed Cheerios, Quaker oatmeal, those snack bars, chewy granola bars, which are always in my book bag. They found the highest levels of glyphosate found in the lab. And this was somewhere in the ballpark of almost 3,000 parts per billion in Quaker oatmeal squares breakfast cereal. And by the way, to put that in context, that's nearly 18 times higher than the environmental working group's children's health benchmark. It is toxic. And when I met my wife at the time, we've been together for almost 20 years. She saw all these empty boxes of Quaker oatmeal squares in my apartment when we met. And I was working at the university gym and we met at school actually. But she's just like, this guy eats a lot of cereal, because I thought that was what was good for my health. And I was literally eating something incredibly toxic and wondering why I still had these seasonal allergies and I had, issues with pain that would come and go. It wasn't until I pulled that stuff out of my diet and just focused on eating real food, minimally processed foods, and everything started to change. But I did this within a larger culture scape of living in a food desert. And I started with myself. And now I can stand here today. My youngest son and my oldest son, their birthdays, my youngest son is turning 12 this weekend, and my older son is turning 23 next week. And my older son was there with me during this transformation. He was there with me in my apartment in Ferguson, where I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor. He was sleeping on an air mattress. And he saw this transformation. He was a part of it all. And he works in fitness to this day. I never told him to do it. I never told him to help all these people that he's helping. He's just been around it. He was infected by the culture that I consciously created. And the same thing is possible for all of our families. And so, number one, like when I went to when we all went to Maui, I realized something incredibly powerful. When we go into another culture, whether that culture is healthy or not, we take our culture with us. When Dr. Paul Saladino goes into another culture, he is a reflection of the culture that he's created within himself. He affects the people around him when he steps into a room. When you stepped onto that campus, you had no choice but to be an influence on those people that you were in contact with. You can't help it. Some people are going to be excited about that, and some people are going to be repelled, because it is having us to look within ourselves and to address what things are we putting in our blind spot? What things are we ignoring? And so my point being that even on the plane, people were walking by, and this, I'm not exaggerating at all. Multiple people walked by us on the plane, just like, your family is so beautiful. Oh my goodness, I would love, can you adopt me? This woman who was probably 80 years old or in her 70s or 80s, she was like, I want to be a part of your family. We didn't talk to them, they just saw us. And that's what's possible by focusing on creating a microculture in our household so that we can then be an example. Because you and I and many people listening have spent many years trying to change the larger culture scape. And we've made a little bit of progress. But I'm telling you, based on the data, the most powerful change comes from the inside out, working on yourself and your family. And then that just bleeds itself out to the larger community. It is the way to go. And so now we've got to focus on, how do we improve our family culture? How do we make great food easy and accessible and delicious? That's another huge part of this. As you know, we don't have to suffer in order to become healthy. Even the concept of dieting. I just saw this study yesterday, actually, and it was this analysis looking at conventional calorie restricted diets in a kind of conventional context here in the United States. And what the researchers found, which is so obvious, is that when people diet using a conventional calorie restricted diet, their cravings dramatically increase for all the stuff they're not supposed to eat, quote, not supposed to eat, right? Instead of how do we deliver real nutrition that provides joy, that provides real satisfaction so that people don't have to suffer, so they don't have cravings for Pop Tarts and for Mountain Dew Red, right? We have to bring in equal or greater pleasure through the food experiences. And that's really the mission behind this new project.
I love it, man. You know that movie Social Dilemma? Tristan talks about like these social media companies just tipping the floor a little bit politically. And I feel like the same thing is happening to us in terms of these nutritional, like our food system. Like these 70% of the US agricultural system, 70% of our food system is just these huge companies making ultra processed food, just tipping us a little bit. We're just going to roll downhill unless we're super conscientious and fight to go up that hill. But they're just tipping us in that direction. It's crazy when you think about it. And then with kids, just like the whole system is built for us to fail. And then I was talking to one of my friends today, and I was reminded of the statistic. I don't know if you've seen this, that the USDA Guidelines Committee, so the 2020 to 2025 USDA Guidelines Committee for like a healthy diet for the United States, on that committee of 20 people, 19 people had ties to the pharmaceutical or industrial food system. 95% of people on the USDA committee had ties. So like we have to, I mean, this is why this idea of culture and community is critical. It's essential because we're basically all standing on a slightly uphill road. And unless we have people around us to like hold our hands and gently nudge us up that road, we're going to fall down the wrong way, which is exactly where I believe I mean, I don't know if the government wants us to fall down that way, but certainly I think that when you look at the industry and the lobbyists and the agribusiness complex, I think that behemoth is definitely nudging us in the other direction. It's pretty crazy. I mean, you want to talk a little bit about kids and cereal boxes, man? Because there's a really interesting sort of vignette in your book about kids and cereal boxes and which cereals they prefer. I mean, talk about being tipped in the wrong direction.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few studies on this. And one of the most fascinating was having children to sample different cereals. And they had like a smiley scale, right? Different levels of smiles. And this reminds me of the opioid scale, by the way, if folks have seen like Painkiller on Netflix or Dope Sick. But even prior to that, I've been talking about this for years with the opioid epidemic. And basically they had this kind of pain scale, like where are you on this with these different smiley and pain faces? And so kind of using the same thing with these kids. And they had them to taste what they believed to be different cereals, but it was the same cereal just with different packaging. And what they found was that by merely having a cartoon character on the front of the box, the children rated the cereal more delicious. They enjoyed it more simply by having some kind of a cartoon figure. And this speaks to the manipulation that's happening with US children, with children really, again, all over the world. And I know that intimately, you know, with Toucan Sam, he's telling me to follow my nose, right? The Fruity Pebbles commercials, the Smacks, the Honey Smacks frog, like these characters, these food manufacturers know they are targeting our children. And the principle in the system, and there's entire books about this, but there are many studies. It's just like, get them while they're young. Get them while they're young, and you can get a lifetime customer. And there are tens of millions of Americans who are lifetime lovers of McDonald's. And I was in that guild for many years, but a revolution had to happen. My pain had to become so bad that I decided to change. I had to have this kind of internal revelation after seeing my various physicians and them telling me that I had this so-called incurable condition. And this was just the way my life was going to be. I had to have this revelation that it doesn't have to be this way. And they're literally telling me that they can't help me. So let me figure out something so that I can just have better days. And then I got to the place where I had the audacity to say, what can I do not just to feel better, but to be the healthiest person in the world. And I start to have these like thinking differently. And by changing my perspective and my attention, I started to see the things that were in my environment the entire time. It's just I wasn't attuned to them. I was just attuned to ultra processed foods, to dysfunction and sickness because that's what was all I saw in my family. And having a family where about 80% of my family members were clinically obese. That's just all I saw, not to mention the heart disease and the cancer and the open heart surgeries and the asthma, and the list goes on and on and on. It was just normalized to me that that's just what it is. That's just I'm just going to have one of these problems. And nothing could be further from the truth. We're not designed like that. And, of course, we've gone through this phase of blaming things on our genetics. And it's happening right now. It's still in process, but the part of the problem is that we get into our bubbles and we think that people know this stuff by now. But a lot of our citizens do not realize this still at this point. And there's still entities that are hanging on and manipulating this message about genetics. There was recently a segment on very popular long running television show 60 Minutes with somebody who's framed as a leading expert in obesity and obesity medicine, saying that the number one cause, she said these are the words, the number one cause of obesity is genetics. The number one cause of obesity is genetics. And it's just like at this point, that is so nefarious and it's so inappropriate. And then you find out that the segment, like literally they say it during the segment, that the segment is sponsored by Wegovy. It's sponsored by an obesity medication.
No.
That expert, yes, it's right. It's on YouTube, man. You can look it up. That this expert is one of the designers, one of the people who's been working behind the scenes to create this medication. And not to say that having medication for certain situations obviously isn't appropriate or viable, but it's creating this shift in this culture where, again, we've become a culture that believes we can get something for nothing, unfortunately. And because for years we've been inundated with things that disempower us and reducing our energy, reducing our will, not willpower, but our will just to live. And I've seen this clinically where people develop this, what we label as learned helplessness, because they really are trying so hard to take control of their health, to lose the weight, to normalize their blood sugar, to reduce their hypertension, whatever the case might be. And they're following the advice of things that simply don't work because their education that they're getting is funded by these massive food companies, and their primary products are ultra processed foods. And so people are trying to lose weight and change their health while the majority of their diet is point system calorie controlled ultra processed meals. And it's just so unfortunate. But here's the thing. Once we become aware of this, we can change it. And this is really the principle because, and by the way, obviously, this isn't necessarily always going to be an easy transition because we have to accept that sometimes the change that we want, we have to change. And I saw this as well when I was doing all of that work for many years, seeing people day in and day out. The number one reason that people would give for not being able to make the dietary changes that were recommended, they would say things like, well, it's just like my husband wouldn't eat this, or, my kids, or it's just like my mom is just like, like they would start pointing the finger at their close loved ones and blame them for them not being able to make more advantageous choices for themselves. And though that is a real factor, absolutely, what I eventually evolved to was let me bring the entire family in on this because I had the education and experience to, quote, get through to different people with different personalities. And what it really is about finding leverage, because everybody listening, we know our family members better than anybody. We know them. The problem is that we lack patience because we just want them to do what we want them to do. Just act right and everything is going to be fine. All right. And that's what creates so much unrest in our relationships. But we know what excites our family members, what excites our kids, what de-excites them, what irritates them, what motivates them, what brings them joy. We know those things, but a lot of times we don't employ the patience to do those things because we're tired. We're beat down. We're experiencing all this stress from the world around us. And I'm telling you, by making a practice of spending time eating together with the people that you love, it's going to help to reduce that stress. Though the energy might not be there initially, it's going to increase your energy to have more patience, to have more compassion, to be more understanding. But it really starts with creating that micro culture change within our environment. And by the way, because this is a new territory for a lot of people, and even somebody like myself who had this as a practice that I integrated into my family, things can get thrown off. Life is going to happen. And so I shared a bunch of strategies on how do we change the kitchen culture? How do we, science backed strategies, by the way, these aren't just airy fairy ideas. Also, how can we change the culture at the dinner table so that everybody looks forward to it and experiences joy and more connection? There are so many cool studies on this, and making this process more rewarding, potentially, of course, than a Netflix series. And it's not that we love to do that. We love to get together and like have a meal, watching the game sometimes, or, dinner, a movie night. But that is not an intimate form of connection. There is a device that has stolen our attention. And so having a set amount of days that we schedule each and every person, this is my call to action for everybody, 3 meals a week. It could be whatever meal you want. Again, Monday, Wednesday dinner, maybe brunch on Saturday with your family. And friends are included as well, by the way. Friends are included as well. And when you do this, you're going to create an insulation for your family's health that buffers you against all that's happening in the society around us. And eventually that's going to bleed out and affect the people around you in a positive way as well. And so that's really my mission, is to really tie together social science and nutritional science, because once we have those things together, we can really be unstoppable.
I remember when I was younger and I used to ask girls if they wanted to go to the movies on a date. And I would go to the movies with a girl on a date. And after the movie, I had no idea who she was. what's the point of going to a date to the movies? I don't understand why people, I guess, once you have an established relationship, you can put yourself in front of a TV and watch a movie together with your partner, but there's no real connection happening there. So I think you make an important point that, like, sitting down with your family in front of the TV is not really connecting. And in your book, you talk about getting rid of your phones. And I've been to a bunch of restaurants recently that are starting to have these boxes on the table where you put your freaking phone, but we have to literally rip these devices that we are so addicted to out of our hands, out of our family's hands, and just freaking look at each other and spend time together. I mean, this reminds me of a scene. I think it's in is it The Social Dilemma? I think it is The Social Dilemma, that documentary, where, and I think they have this kind of like acting within the documentary where they're trying to sit down at dinner with the family. And so the mom, she knows that the kids are addicted to their devices. They're always on their devices together at dinner. And so she gets one of these time safes, and it's made from plastic or something, and she puts everyone's phones in there. And in the documentary, one of the kids literally gets up in the middle of dinner and just smashes the thing because she's so addicted to her phone. I'm thinking, like, okay, this is a great point. But yeah, I think you're so right. We have to connect as humans around food. And I don't think that can be highlighted enough. It does recapitulate what we've experienced as humans historically. The Hadza sit around the fire together with each other. But I think that there are so many things working against us at the level of our food, at the level of the advertising of our food, at the level of the lobbying and the subsidization of our food, at the level of what's in our food, at the level of our devices, at the level of our distractions around it. I mean, man. And so this is it's a radical clarion call to say, put down your food and eat real food at dinner with your family and watch what happens. I mean, that's a pretty radical thing, man. That's the beginning of some major changes.
Absolutely, man. You said it perfectly. Like, once we get reconnected as humans, and there's things for thousands of years we've been talking about, like a new entity is created. when we actually are in proximity to each other, but we've just been so pulled away and distracted from our greatness in a sense. And I remember even being in Maui and sitting down with my family at dinners and seeing this couple, for whatever reason, they just seemed to be eating at the same time as us. Not every meal, but maybe like 6 times. And every single time, both of them were on their phone the entire meal. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't. But then again, I kind of could. And it's just like, what? Why are you even here? And again, we're all, especially in this culture, there are going to be times when technology is going to be involved, and that's okay. We're not here to demonize that, but we're also here to ensure that what makes us most human and what makes us most healthy and contributes to our longevity, that is protected. And so that means that we intentionally spend time eating together with the people that we love, and having that be under the umbrella of delicious, real food. That is, because here's another principle to take away, is that food isn't just food, it's information. That's providing ourselves with the real building blocks that brings about true health and wellness.
And in your book, you give some incredible examples of the way that certain vitamins, vitamin E and vitamin C, specifically in foods, are more bioavailable and affect the body differently than those vitamins in synthetic form in isolation. I think this is a point that is also very difficult to overstate. And I love this idea that food is information. I couldn't agree more. And that there's no substitute for eating a whole food. And the amount of people now, especially in the longevity space, Shawn, trying to, quote, biohack their way by either eating vegan diets and then supplementing with a bunch of nutrients that are found exclusively in meat, or just eating highly processed food and using a bunch of supplements to make up for the nutrient deficiencies, just makes me think like, wow, how far we've fallen. It's just, I just do not think that there is a way to recreate the information in a whole food with a supplement. And yes, there are valuable things in foods that are probably valuable for humans when taken in supplement form. Taurine is a great example, studied across multiple species in longevity trials and found to be beneficial. But to me, that says eat meat because taurine is only found in meat. It's only found in animal foods. But it seems like so many people want to say, oh, I'll just take a taurine supplement. And I think that is a fool's errand, because how many other nutrients are found in foods that we don't even understand? We're just beginning to understand the complexity of foods around peptides. Right. This is a huge reason that I'm such a fan of organs. I mean, we know that muscle meat is valuable for humans in terms of peptides, but organs are the same way. Talk about information. Talk about valuable information. Just there's so much information in food that I don't think that within our lifetime, or even probably 5 lifetimes from now, we will ever understand the level of complexity in a food. And to try and distill that into a supplement, or to try and create highly processed cereal and then put a bunch of synthetic vitamins in it so that the nutrition label looks good and people are confused. I mean, you look at the nutrition label on a Pop-Tart, looks pretty good until you realize it's completely fake food. I think this is such an important point. I'm glad you brought it up. Like, food is information. There is no substitute for a whole food, whether it's from plant or animal origin. And the way those affect our body is incredibly powerful.
Listen, when I went to my nutritional science class in college, we were told, of course, food pyramid, get 7 to 11 servings of grains. If people want to lose weight, just have them to expend more energy than they take in, manage those calories, and make sure everybody's getting their essential vitamins and nutrients by taking a multivitamin. All right. Now, here's the biggest problem with that. There are multiple, and I was not taught about this in my expensive college education. There are multiple forms of vitamin C. There are multiple forms of B12. There are multiple forms of every single nutrient that you can name. We're just now scratching the surface on the complexity of foods. And so what form of vitamin C am I getting in this synthetic supplement? That, by the way, Paul, I don't think a lot of people realize this either. We're talking upwards of 90% of vitamin C supplements are derived from genetically modified cornstarch or corn syrup. Corn. All right. So those little packets that you see out there at the checkout, have we ever questioned where it's coming from when we see these concentrated forms of vitamin C? And we were never designed to eat nutrients in isolation. So this is why, of course, yeah, I'm a fan of whole food based supplements, but we've got to understand. And by the way, I also shared a study looking at people who take synthetic vitamin C and found that they have a 2 times higher risk of developing kidney stones for people who consistently take synthetic vitamin C supplements. So truly, like, this is not a joke. These synthetic forms of these nutrients or isolated forms of these nutrients don't even compare to the whole food versions of these nutrients that we can easily access, as you mentioned, from food. And so that's what it's really about is, again, redirecting our attention to things that not just date back, thousands of years in our evolution and how we interacted with food, but we've got so much solid science on this that it's really hard to ignore. But the mission is getting the information into people's hands.
That's why I appreciate what you do, man. You're a treasure, Shawn Stevenson. Where can people find more of your stuff? Where can they pre-order this cookbook? How do they find you, brother?
Awesome. Well, you can pick up the cookbook from your favorite retailer, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all that good stuff. But definitely go to eatsmartercookbook.com to get hooked up with the pre-order bonuses. So we're doing a 25K health and fitness giveaway. So we've got all these incredible companies that are on this mission with me, with us. For example, some people are going to win $500 in fitness equipment from On It, $500 in groceries from Thrive Market. The list goes on and on. So many cool things that people can get access to. So you get automatically entered into that. And we're also doing a family health and fitness summit coming up here in October 2023. And it's a virtual event. The ticket is $297. You get a free ticket to the event that you can attend. And you also get the recordings for yourself and your family for years to come. You get to learn from people who are working in the health and fitness space, who have kids and who've navigated creating a culture of wellness within their household, despite the environment that's outside of their doors. And so, like, learning how do you deal with picky eaters? How do you save money on groceries? All those kind of cool things. And the list goes on and on. I'm talking about top people like Dr. Daniel Amen, board certified psychiatrist, child psychiatrist, Layla Ali, undefeated boxing champion, big person in fitness, but she also won the cooking show Chopped twice. Incredible cook. And so, like, she's probably one of the busiest people I've ever met, but she makes family dinners for her family. She's made it a mandate. She does that 3 to 4 times a week at least. Like, my question for her would be like, how do you make time to do this with all that you have going on? So it's a really special event and so much more. And by the way, so being a part of this movement with the cookbook is one of those things where this is something that's going to be a staple in your family and in your kitchen for many years to come. As Paul, I'm so grateful for you sharing that at the beginning of this conversation, that unlike other cookbooks, I really worked to create substantial value in the front part of the book. And I did a lot of, like, kind of market research and asking how people use cookbooks. And so I put over 250 scientific references into that front portion of the book, but in a way that is fun, hard hitting, entertaining, beautiful. The layout of the book is gorgeous. And, it's just something fun to look at, just like flipping through the pages. Just so I'm very proud of it. And it's something that I've worked a couple of years to put this together, and really 20 years. I'm about to hit my 21st year of working in this field. And it's so amazing that, like, this comes at this particular time when families have been fractured. And this is a time to really rebuild that connection for our family and friends and move forward with a different level of power. So again, it's eatsmartercookbook.com. And of course, you can pick it up from your favorite retailer.
Man, Shawn, I think you should be proud of it, dude. I think that one of your superpowers is being able to present complex technical information in a very relatable way. So thank you for doing that good work, man, in your podcast, on social media, with your cookbook. And I appreciate you very much. And I look forward to seeing you in person soon when we cross paths.
Same here. I appreciate you so much.